Started? Lovely, thank you. All right. I'm calling to order our Mount Shasta Planning Commission regular meeting for Tuesday, April 18th, 2023. We'll have a flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item 2, roll call. Todd, you up for that?
Sure. David McDowell, not here. Von Boyinger is here.
Here.
Belinda?
Here.
Yes, right, apparently. And Melanie?
Here.
Okay. Tucson?
Here.
Okay. And Paul Beck?
Not here.
Not here.
Not
Okay.
here.
And Alan?
Here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Item number 3 is public comment, and this is time set aside for residents to address the Planning Commission on items that are not included on tonight's agenda. We have one person who wants to, and do we have anybody remotely who's interested in talking to us about an item?
No hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay. Moving on to item 4, the main reason of us getting together tonight is for our Mount Shasta 2023 to 2031 Housing Element Public Review Draft. And I'll hand it off to staff.
Sure. I think the...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I've got to be on the mic, I forget. So we are a little behind on updating our housing element. We've been working with Plan West Consultants, and we have taken an approach on this document to this point where we've included the things that we need to include by state law and language that the state requires us to have, and that if we don't have it, HCD will not certify it. And even if we get through, we get through the Planning Commission, we get through City Council, it doesn't end there. It ends with a negotiation with HCD. This is weird having the screen in the way. That's not going to help. And HCD will come back and forth, and typically they'll ask for more information than what we've given them. That's just the way they work, and we have to comply with what they want. So that does not mean that there are things that are in this draft agenda that we can't change. It's just that the majority of the stuff that you see in there, it's very lean. So in other words, we have to have it if we want to get it certified and be compliant with the state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Plan West Partners with Vanessa Blodgett and Michelle Nielsen to go through how did we get here, context, and a kind of walk through on what was considered as part of the housing element and what we need to have in here, and we'll kick it off with these guys.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Vanessa Blodgett, and I'm a principal planner with Plan West Partners, and we have been working with Todd and the city over the past almost year on the housing element update. So before we get into our presentation, I do want to acknowledge that the information in the housing element, there is a lot of it, and it's a lot to digest, and it is catered to the city's specific conditions and needs, but there are substantial portions that are required by the state, and or they're meant to address specific state requirements. And then I do have Michelle Nielsen here with me, and she is going to share our presentation and we will get into it. And if I didn't say it, thanks for having us this evening. We are happy to be here and look forward to hearing
Just trying
feedback.
to see it and then see these guys, and I'm not really sure how to do
Oh,
that.
yeah, so where do you want it? Right here? Right here?
Can we put it on the chair? Is that possible?
Great. And then, Michelle, it looks like we're seeing, not the slideshow yet, but you're getting there. There we go. Perfect. All right. Are we ready for us to continue?
We have a little technical thing going. Maybe it's kind of a distraction. So if you'd hold a moment.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Yep, we're good.
Are we sorted? All right. Please go ahead.
All right. Thanks. So next slide, please, Michelle. And as I said, I am Vanessa Blodgett, and I have with me Michelle Nielsen. We also had Jason Barnes, our GIS analyst, and we had other staff helping us prepare the document, the draft document. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this meeting is to provide an overview of the housing element update, including the process to date, the housing element contents and recommendations, including a brief summary of the key findings and the housing element programs. We will get into just some big picture overview of what housing element is and why we're updating it. And then we will talk about, the recommendation and next steps. And we are happy to answer questions and have a discussion after our presentation. Next slide, please. So just some housing element basics. What is a housing element? California requires that all local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in the community. It is a mandatory element of the general plan that's updated every 8 years on what is called cycles. The city of Mount Shasta, we're currently in the 6th cycle housing element, so it's for the period 2023 to 2031. The California Department of Housing and Community Development reviews and certifies housing elements, as Todd mentioned, and the city also annually reports progress to HCD on implementing the housing element programs and overall housing developments and construction in the city. So why does it matter that we're updating this? There are housing grant programs that require compliance with the state housing element law, and you have to have a certified housing element to be eligible to apply. There's also grants that support infrastructure and that require housing element compliance. It also is important for the city to remain in good standing for the existing grants that are both supporting the preparation of the housing element, this effort, and some other efforts through SB2 and LEAP grant funding. Next slide, please. So what does the housing element do? An effective housing element provides the necessary conditions for developing and preserving an adequate supply of housing, including housing affordable to all income levels. Local governments must adequately plan to meet their existing and projected housing needs, including their share of the regional housing needs allocation, which for this cycle, the city's is relatively low, but there are additional housing needs that are evaluated and determined through the needs assessment document, which we will highlight a little bit later on. The housing element is the city's planning document that sets the table for housing for all residents, and it doesn't commit the city to build housing, but it does provide the adequate zoning for housing development, and it doesn't require new housing to be built, and all housing still must comply with all of the city's existing standards and regulations and secure all necessary permits to construct housing. Next slide, please. So how did we get here to where we are today? We did, as I mentioned, we did start almost a year ago with the city council, and we had a workshop with them in August of 2022. We started our stakeholder outreach around then. And then in October of 2022, we had a community workshop and released a community survey through November. And we did receive over 200 survey responses, which we felt was pretty substantial and a good response. We did collate and review, and we have considered all the responses that we received through that process. And Appendix E of the housing element document does contain the full results and responses received to that survey. And then since then, we have been continuing to work on preparing the needs assessment and the proposed programs that are in the draft element right now. Next slide, please. Since the draft was released on April 5th, we have received a few public comments and questions, and we just wanted to cover a couple of those just in case anyone else had those same questions. And one of them was just a clarification of the public comment period. And so the draft was posted on April 5th, and the city is required to have at least a 30-day public review period. We will be taking comments all the way through the tentative city council meeting, which is tentatively scheduled for May 22nd, or whenever it is. We will be taking comments through that meeting. And so comments can be submitted now and up until that point. And next slide. Clarification on the public review draft and submittal to HCD. So what we are reviewing and that has been prepared is just a draft, and the draft document gets submitted to HCD for a 90-day comment period. And we incorporate comments from the public, but then we also, after that 90-day comment period, incorporate comments from HCD. And in our experience, HCD always has comments on the drafts, no matter how well we think we address everything that they want to see. And then it's at that time, after the 90-day review period, that the city then considers adoption. So that is, looking out into September, October at the earliest. And next slide, please. There were some questions about the Surplus Lands Act, which all local governments are subject to. And for this to be applicable, there is a very defined process that HCD is also involved in, but it is separate from the housing element process. And so there are, procedural requirements that the city takes to go through that process. Next bullet, please. And then the sites inventory that is currently in Appendix B, there was a site-specific study that we were not aware of before that was incorporated into the draft, and those sites were identified that shows presence of wetlands. And so we are coordinating with city staff to look at what other sites and opportunities there are for the city to meet its regional housing needs obligation. There are a number of statutory criteria that to make sites eligible to identify, the HCD will accept. So we are currently evaluating that as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so now I'm just going to get into a brief overview of what is in the document itself. There are 3 chapters and 5 appendices. And as I mentioned before, it is a big document and there's a lot of content. A lot of it is technical and highly detailed and is required by HCD in the state for the city to include in there and the associated analysis. In the introduction, there is a key to some of the frequently used acronyms and definitions, and an overview of kind of the entire document. Chapter 2 is important, really important, and really sets forth the city's strategies to address housing needs in the community and includes the goals, policies, and the implementation programs. And then chapter 3 is a review of the prior housing element and progress the city has made in implementing the programs identified in the 5th cycle housing element. Next slide, please. The appendices are substantial. Appendix A is the needs assessment, housing constraints, and assessment of fair housing. And there is a lot in there. It gets into the demographic data, a lot of analysis about the city's existing zoning standards and code, and then also addresses a newer state law regarding assessment of fair housing. And Appendix B is the housing sites inventory. C includes some funding resources, D is the glossary, and as I mentioned before, E includes public outreach, including survey and other community engagement and comments we have received, or were received when the draft was compiled. And we will be adding to Appendix E as we continue to receive public comments. And with that, I think I am going to hand it over to Michelle to continue and get into some of the key aspects of the update.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. We don't have a nice transition slide, but here we go. I can hit the button. Okay, so a little bit of an overview with a little more detail on Appendix A. As Vanessa mentioned, so this is, it's a comprehensive update from the city's 5th cycle housing element. That is the housing element that's 2014 to 2023, this previous period. So it is a comprehensive update to reflect changes in demographic conditions and the projected housing needs. There's also an update on constraints to housing. There were some new requirements in state law and what the expectations from the Department of Housing and Community Development, along with feedback from stakeholders in the community. And there's an analysis of the city's zoning code. And also the assessment of fair housing. This is in response and a requirement of state law. So that is sprinkled throughout Appendix A. There's requirements that there be a regional analysis, which is Siskiyou County. So that's readers who have managed to read through some of that, why you see Siskiyou County get mentioned, and maps showing Siskiyou County is they want some comparables in the metrics of AFFH. So that's a requirement, and it's new. And so some of the key takeaways of the housing needs assessment and the housing constraints, and just so folks, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but actually some of the demographic patterns that are discussed in this part of the document Mount Shasta is experiencing are actually being experienced in some of the other communities in Siskiyou County, and I think probably other rural parts of Northern California. Same with the housing stock. So some of the key takeaways here is overall the population of the city has declined, although the number and percentage of residents who are 65 and older has increased. With that, the size of households, the number of people in a household has declined. There used to be more folks in the household. More residents in Mount Shasta rent their homes than own. A significant portion of residents who are homeowners and renters, both tenures, are cost burdened, which means they are paying 30% or more of their gross household income towards housing. So whether it's a mortgage or rent, utilities, so that's seen for both homeowners and renters. Cost of housing is high in Mount Shasta. That's probably not a surprise to folks here. And the vacancy rate is relatively low. The data indicates, again, probably no surprise, that there are a number of second homes in the community that aren't available for their second homes. And that portions of the city zoning code are constrained. This is pretty common across the board. Just a part of that is that state law has changed dynamically, so the analysis has changed too. So trying to condense the assessment of fair housing into some key takeaways here. Much of Mount Shasta is considered what's called a high resource area, indicating high levels of employment with close proximity to jobs. Folks don't have to travel far. There's access to effective educational opportunities in the community for children and adults, low concentration of poverty, and low levels of environmental pollutants. So those are all great things. There are some fair housing issues that are occurring, and they relate to and just the little points here are shortage of housing affordable and accessible to seniors, the workforce in the community, persons with disability, disproportionate housing needs, including displacement risk. That's related to the high cost of housing relative to income. And housing condition and habitability. That again is related to income. When your income is stretched thin, for like a homeowner, doing major repairs on their homes is a little more difficult financially for folks. So some of the strategies to address these, and these piggyback on the housing programs that are in Chapter 2, so not new programs, is to, and also they reflect, incorporate other state law mandates. But one strategy is to improve the availability of fair housing information in the community, making it more available to folks through using existing tools like the city's webpage, and doing proactive outreach to the community. It's something the state is wanting to see. So being out in city events and just making that information more available to folks who may not be aware of the city's programs or what fair housing is. For the city to continue facilitation and support for affordable housing project. That's an ongoing practice. For the city to continue active enforcement against illegal short-term rentals as those, they take away TOC tax probably from the city and also take away housing that would be available potentially. And then to continue to provide free technical guidance on habitability and weatherization improvements that a property owner could make to their property, and to support and promote nonprofit organizations such as Great Northern that offer zero and low cost rehab or weatherization programs to households. So on Appendix B, so this is the, we got, as Vanessa mentioned, we got some public comment on, and this is what we're going to be revisiting. on parts of this to address those concerns regarding the sites having the presence of wetlands and a stream on it. But the environmental constraints that were used to evaluate sites in the element, wetlands, brownfields, hazards related to flooding, the presence of streams and water bodies, and then fire hazard severity. So this is actually more environmental constraints are considered in this housing element compared to the last housing element. The fifth cycle housing element really only looked at flooding, I think was kind of the extent of that. As was mentioned earlier, there are numerous criteria for a site to be considered to be eligible for a city or county's lower income regional housing needs allocation. So this is the 2 units that the city has to plan for. And some of the criteria are the property needs to be zoned to allow a minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. Essential infrastructure, that's water, sewer, sites accessible, dry utilities have to be available at the site during the 5-year planning period. The site has to be at least half an acre in size and not bigger than 10 acres. The zoning must allow by right residential development. And also that when you look at those environmental constraints that occur in a community, there has to be something left for it to be buildable. So those are some of the really key attributes, components of state law regarding to evaluate a site if it's eligible for inclusion to meet the needs of the RENA. So just to reiterate, identifying a site in the housing element does not mean the city is going to develop housing on these sites, nor does it compel a property owner to develop housing that is affordable to certain income categories. What it means is that site has attributes, these ones that meet state law, looking at environmental constraints that indicate that it is suitable for housing, but it's not an entitlement, it's not an approval. Those things still have to be undertaken by the property owner if they so choose. And then just a little bit more on the other appendices. So funding resources, focuses mostly on available government funding that support housing development or can support an infrastructure development associated with housing. A glossary, because there is a lot of technical language and jargon in the document. And as was mentioned earlier, Chapter 1 has a subset of some of these terms to hopefully make it a little easier to read through. And then Appendix C is the community outreach and community engagement. And so this is where, as we get public comments that come in, and I'm sure we'll be getting more, will go and will be appended to the document. So in terms of the goals, policies, and implementation measures, the programs is what you hear us talk about. Their state law also speaks to that and what they have to do. So identify sites with appropriate zoning and development standards and services to accommodate the locality's share of regional housing needs for each income level. Assist in the development of workforce housing and housing affordable for lower income households. The programs need to remove governmental constraints and other constraints to housing maintenance, improvement, and development for all income levels. The ones that the city has the ability to affect, or the priority ones. Promote fair and equal housing opportunities, including addressing disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity. Conserve and improve existing housing, including assisted housing that is at risk to conversion to market rate housing. So this would be subsidized housing. And maximize housing opportunities throughout the community. So some of the key approaches, strategies, if you will, to address Mount Shasta's housing needs, is the programs that provide additional support to all city programs, making changes to the zoning code because there are portions that are constrained, encourage workforce housing, and that, housing is an economic development issue, where people live and housing, and that, can people in the community that work in the community, can they also live there? So then their kids can go to school there. Update regulations to meet state requirements. There's a lot of that. Improving housing information and housing and the availability of that information to residents. So that's the transparency. That's the that goes into the programs for fair housing. Just making that information more readily available and being proactive. So in hopes to hopefully make this is chapter 2 of the document, in case I didn't say that, make it hopefully maybe a little bit easier to go through, because it is long and it's difficult to read, perhaps, is we provided a couple of icons to maybe help just ease with that. So the state of California icon is applied to programs that fulfill a specific housing law requirement. And then the fair housing icon is used and applied to programs that are meaningful actions to affirmatively further fair housing. So in the programs, there are a mix of programs that the intent is to address older housing laws that require programs. And so there was changes to the law in 2007 related to emergency shelters. There's a little catch up for the city to do there. Manufactured housing on lots zoned for stick-built single-family dwellings. These would be manufactured homes on permanent foundations, improved allowance for group homes, written procedures to prioritize water and sewer to affordable housing developments, written procedures related to the ministerial streamline approval process, transitional and supportive housing. There was changes, I think, about circa 2007, so we'll catch up there with definitions. And update the definition of family. Some of these other jurisdictions are having to do the same catch up. Just resources were tight, budgets are tight. So then, as was mentioned, the state has passed a lot of laws, and so there are new housing laws that require programs. So accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. So it is our experience that as part of the housing element review, the state is also having another part of their department review local jurisdictions. If they have an adopted accessory dwelling unit, they're reviewing those for compliance, because that part of state law has been updated almost annually since 2017. And so they're doing a catch up. So I think this, if I recall correctly, the city has one, but we're anticipating get some comments on that. Affirmatively furthering fair housing, and that's those fair housing. Those are the equal housing opportunities, the little icon. Emergency and Transitional Housing Act of 2019 and AB 2339. AB 2339 was mostly an analysis, but there was also some new definitions that were added as to what constitutes an emergency shelter and interim housing solutions. By right, permanent supportive housing developments is a new one. Replacement housing for housing element inventory sites. These would be your RENA sites if they have existing housing on them. We're looking at sites that don't have housing on them, but the state is still looking that there be a program for this. No Net Loss and Housing Accountability Act. That is basically during the review process of entitlements and building permits. Amendments to state density bonus law, that too has received massive updates, near annual. So catch up there. Housing Information Transparency Act, that relates to just making information available to the public and to the community. So what as contained in the staff report, staff is respectfully recommending that the Planning Commission receive the staff report on the public review back, as we're doing right now, receive and consider comments from the public, provide direction, and recommend that the City Council authorize the document be submitted to the Department of HCD for review. It's just the review. It's a 90-day review period. This is not an adoption action. That is not considered the action before the Planning Commission, nor will that be the action before you first. So just to maybe put a little finer point on the next steps.
Hey, Michelle, can I pause you for a second? Can you back up and restate the last item?
Yes. Provide staff direction and recommend that the City Council authorize that the 2023 to 2031 Housing Element Update Public Review Draft be submitted to the Department of Housing and Community Development, ACD, for review pursuant to Government Code 65585, subparagraph B.
She added to that, because she blanked out, and she added some commentary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so after that, you spoke to some timelines, and you said this was preliminary because it wasn't the adoption, and then you cut out, and that's what we missed.
The adoption draft. What I was saying, sorry that I cut out, was that this is what's being asked to the Planning Commission this evening, and then when that next step at the City Council is just the submittal to the Department of Housing and Community Development. This is not for adoption for either the Planning Commission or for the City Council. An adoption draft would not be advanced until HCD completes their review. We receive comments, because that is highly likely, and the document is revised. It is the public will be again published and made available for public comment, and it will come back to your Planning Commission for consideration, and that's the adoption. We're not at an adoption phase. And then when it's ultimately to the City Council. And then it goes back to HCD. So kind of in a illustrating maybe what I was just describing. The next step in the journey for the public review draft would be at the City Council and for them to authorize submittal. And then the document is revised based on Planning Commission, City Council, and community input. And the city is required to spend at least 10 business days to consider and incorporate that input. The city has to do that before it's submitted to HCD. And at that point, it's submitted to HCD, so that's June. And the document, this revised document, will also be posted to the city website and webpage and Siskiyou Housing as well, and the public can submit comments. And then that, when it's submitted to HCD, that starts the 90-day review period, and they do take the whole 90 days, has been our experience, and they will, in all likelihood, issue a letter reporting their results because what they're doing is reviewing the document for compliance with state law. And then after that, the draft document is revised again, and it must address HCD's comments before adoption. And housing element adoption phase would be planning commission, city council. These would be public hearings noticed. Those would be, that would be the adoption phase. So about October is the tentative schedule. And then after that, the adopted document is submitted to HCD for a 60-day certification review that they do. And if they find the housing element complies with state law, it is certified. It's a finding that the state has made that the city's in compliance with state law. If they do find it doesn't comply with state law, go back to step 5, revise the document, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We're ready for questions, if there may be, if that's the pleasure of the Planning Commission or public comment.
I think we'll, number 5. What are we looking at?
Go from 4 to 6 on the agenda.
Oh, well, we aren't there yet. Wait,
Or we're about to be.
no, well, no, we've got quite a while that we're going to be on number 4.
Any questions?
What I'd like to do next is give the planning commissioners an opportunity, because I think a lot of us have notes and questions to ask regarding the draft, and then I'll open it up to public comment. And then if there's any additional questions, we'll go from there. So, commissioners, does anybody in particular want to start? Go ahead.
I've got one. In a couple places it cites zoning constraints or zoning code constraints to development. Are there specific constraints that you can describe?
Yes. So one thing that comes to mind was I noticed in the review is that there's a requirement that multifamily development, all multifamily development, whether it's market rate or if it's assisted, that for every, I think it's once the development's over 5 units, that they require a RV parking space. And then the process for, which perhaps in a market rate, a development, there may be, this is an RV parking space in addition to the, for parking spaces for, passenger cars and trucks and that sort of thing. But they're in the likelihood for a assisted development where people, their income qualified, 80% or lower income, they probably don't have RVs. But the procedure for changing that standard had to go to the Planning Commission. And so to make the recommendation is to provide a pathway where for like an assisted project that the planning director could, based on submitted information, could modify or waive that standard. There was also the design review guidelines, the threshold for when design reviews triggered is lower than what the R3, what is allowed by right. As I read, the design guidelines was a multifamily development of 3 or more units was subject to design review. But the R3 zoning district, which there's language in the purpose statement, this is specifically talks about implementation or to facilitate the city meeting its housing element, it goes up to 4 by right, assuming, the other requirements can be met. So there's a recommendation to bring the design guideline just up 1 more to be vertically consistent with the zoning regulations. So those were a couple that came to mind. I'm not sure if that's
So this change in the housing element doesn't change those. It recommends that we go through a process to revise our zoning ordinance, correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Tucson?
One
Oh,
other
go
thing,
ahead.
what's a junior accessory dwelling unit? What's a junior one? There's a regular ADU
Go ahead. Yeah,
and there's a junior.
yeah, okay.
That's to you guys.
So yeah, please define a JADU.
So it's defined in state law, but what it is, so I'm kind of going off the top of my head here, is it is part of the existing structure. I believe it could include an attached garage, but basically you take an existing attached garage or existing living space and you create an accessory dwelling unit within that space. And there is a state, part of a junior accessory dwelling unit is either the primary, the main house, or the junior accessory dwelling unit has to be owner occupied. And there's some size limits, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what they are, but it limits the size of a junior ADU, so it's smaller, and there are specific criteria and requirements in state code of what meets those criteria.
And standard ADUs have to be separate structures?
No, they don't have to be, no.
A junior ADU can have a shared bathroom, for instance, and there can be some shared facilities within a junior ADU, whereas a regular ADU is more of a separate
Got it.
space.
All right, thank you. That was all for me.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Tucson?
Just a point of correction on the Chapter 3 chart. There was in three places it mentioned Carmen Drive and the number of units that were built recently. I believe it said 25 units there, but it's actually 12. And 3 of those units were affordable units.
Great, thank you
Due
for
to
that.
the density bonus.
Great.
And then I believe, Vanessa, you were talking at the beginning about the parcels that were picked out for the RHNA. Was that just an oversight that they had wetlands on them and so they can't really be considered for that?
Well, and what we looked at to define wetlands was the National Wetlands Inventory. So we just looked at big picture, like a GIS layer that we have, which was the best available information that we had at that time. So there were not wetlands on that layer, but then we were just recently informed that there were site-specific studies and were actually wetlands on that site. So we were provided with new site-specific information.
Okay, so am I to understand that these 2 parcels just won't comply with that, and you're looking for different parcels that will take their place?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it for now.
I don't recall those wetlands being that restrictive on the sites in question.
Right, yeah, so they were able to, they were able to
Avoid them.
build a school there, or to plan a school there and avoid the wetlands. So, I don't know if you've looked closely at the wetland delineation map, but development was possible, as
Yeah.
Alan's referring to.
But it wasn't, the wetland portion was not where the school was going to be built. The school was going to be built off,
Yeah.
because the school it's a
Yeah,
huge.
but there's been
property.
other development ideas brought forth on the property. I didn't think they were horribly restrictive, but anyway, thank you. Sorry.
I guess one more
Go ahead,
question. Maybe it's for Todd. But has the Golden Eagle kind of withdrawn their conditional use permit for that property?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that.
Has Golden Eagle Charter School withdrawn their conditional use permit for that property?
I don't know formally whether they've withdrawn it, but they have a different site that they're building on. And the appeal still is ongoing for the original site.
Okay.
Anything else? They're good?
That's it for now.
Okay, Belinda?
Group homes, HO 424, I don't know the difference between what would be objective and subjective CUPs. Can you give me an example? Because group homes are challenging, and I don't know what the difference is.
So they talk about, or they, not they, so there's objective standards and subjective standards. That might be a good place to start.
Okay.
So the subjective would be using language compatible with, similar to, whereas objective language would be 20-foot front yard setback, 5-foot side yard. There are ways in for design review that can be you can develop objective standards for design review. City of Los Gatos did that, and there's some other, but anyways,
I understand.
So I mean, I can give you a local example, like for instance, the mountain theme is subjective. Versus something that laid out dimensions, materials that had to meet that criteria setback, something that's very clear that you can cookie cutter follow and get to an end result.
Yes. So I'm also needing a little clarity on understanding the R3. I don't know how to even say it. So if they come to us, a development that's over R3 but in an R3 zone has to come to us for architectural design, are we going to make all R3 have to have architectural design? Is it to make it so it's fair? Is that what happens? Anybody know how to
Do you mean,
answer?
if it's a 4-unit? I think the threshold was 3 or 4 units, and I think.
Well, there was something.
It's 4 for CUP.
Yeah, so a subdivision is 5 and 4 is just whatever. But it sounded like in that HO 238 and 237 that there was some conflict if you wanted to build an affordable housing development and you had to get an architectural review, but somebody else building the 4-unit didn't have to. And that was a conflict and maybe not something the state would allow? You have to subject everybody in R3 to the same standards?
So maybe I can explain it better. So the R3 zone is written that you can do up to a 4-plex, whether it's an affordable housing project or a market rate project. And you don't have wetlands present by right. However, in the design guidelines that apply, there's a threshold written in there. Single-family residences are clearly exempt, duplexes, and then a triplex. But then you go to the next one, that 4-plex, so 4 units or more, that is subject to architectural design review. So there's they're not vertically consistent, those design standards apply both the same to market rate and an assisted project. So in terms of the affordability of the units, there's no difference, but there's one part of the code, the zoning of R3, which has a purpose statement explicitly talking about facilitating implementation of the housing element. And that's typically where units that are assisted or maybe designed such that to be more affordable are more likely to go in your R3 zone because of the higher density. But the design review gets triggered at a lower threshold than what they could do by right. Hopefully that helps clarify.
So what does the city have to do to make that correct?
There's a recommendation to adjust the design guideline so that 3-unit or that it matches the zoning. So you can do a 4-unit, the R3, you can do up to one fourplex, 1 4-unit, assuming you don't have wetlands or anything.
Right.
And you meet the other standards. And then the design review is the same. So they're the same. You don't have a lower threshold. But then if someone wanted to do a 5-unit on that R3 parcel, they would need a use permit under the zoning. They'd also need architectural review. So just leveling, keeping them at the same level for consistency.
Okay. Let's see. And, one of the commenters made a comment about CEQA, and this 6th cycle hasn't been CEQA'd. But then I read somewhere when I was looking it up, just because I didn't know what all that was about, that if it had been done in the 5th cycle, it kind of can carry through the 6th cycle. Now, can you tell me what we need to know about CEQA and this document?
Yeah, I will try to answer that. So we will be doing CEQA. We anticipate being able to do a notice of exemption because we are not proposing any land use or zoning changes or density increases in any of the districts. So the housing element itself and the policies are really just policy updates and are not impacting physical changes to the environment that have not already been considered in adopting the general plan itself and the land use designations. So we will be coming forward with a notice of exemption when this comes back for adoption at that point.
Okay.
What we anticipate.
And I know the last thing I have, which is just a little technical thing, is the HO 711. It's the biannual trainings, and we have the little California thing and the other icon that we've met these, and I don't think so. So I don't know. We haven't had any trainings. So I'm saying that because we would like trainings, but we don't want to drive to Reading. So that's just, and I think we'd like a nice Zoom meeting where we can learn things and know things. So that's for you, Todd, because.
I need to understand it first.
Well, it just says that we get 2 biannual trainings, and it's that we're totally up to date with that.
Is it specific for housing or just biannual trainings, period?
Let me see. Oh, I didn't write down what it was. It was about for housing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to throw a CEQA in there occasionally, a little update.
Yeah.
But we haven't had any trainings.
Okay.
And so those icons mean this is a new program that is going, required. So that is, the intent is so that those things can start happening for you.
And it's supposed to happen by December. So that's December 20, was it 23? Maybe it was 24. If it was 24.
It might have been 2024. I don't think I had it this year.
Yeah, I can't
I think I gave you guys.
I was just enthusiastic. I was wanting some training, so.
So Vanessa and Michelle, you may not know this, but, given that this is new, how were cities notified that these trainings are available? Do you guys know?
Yeah, when I was an employee of Humboldt County, for housing providers, they offered fair housing training. This might be a little bit different. And they went to the local League of California Services to provide the training. And it was done entirely by one of their attorney there did the training. so it could be, and the League of California Cities on some of these like Housing Accountability Act might be a good resource. And I think a lot of like trainings, from what I've seen, a lot of it's moved to making it virtual to make it easier and more cost effective across the board for everybody. But the Department of Public Health, the county might know, or the NorCal COC that services this area, that Siskiyou, the region, might be a good place to start, or rather than legal services.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Is that it for you?
Yes.
Okay, Vaughn, what you got for us?
Not much. Just a question with regards to, I don't know, did you see do you folks see the comments that we get at all or no? From public?
We've received some of them. I don't know if we have seen all of them, but we have received some of them.
Well, I think the only thing that caught my eye was it seemed like a random list of cities that didn't necessarily relate to Mount Shasta city that were listed that get CEQA, that had done CEQAs for these, and it didn't seem any rhyme or reason to it. Could you make heads or tails of why those cities might do it and we might not?
I didn't see that specific comment, but one reason is if cities are required, and a lot of cities are required to do a zoning amendment to increase density to accommodate their regional housing needs allocation sites. So if any city has to do an update like that, that is more likely to require a higher level of CEQA review.
Well, I also noticed that most of the cities were not in our area of the state, so
Yeah.
I was one of the reasons why I was asking. That's my only question. Thank you.
Yep. And that's likely because the cities that are not in rural Northern California have to accommodate much more housing units than the city of Mount Shasta does. So.
Huge.
Thank you.
Huge numbers.
Thanks, Vaughn. Okay, well, unlike everyone else, I have a lot of questions, so but I tried to make them very specific to where I found them in the document. So, and there were a lot of typos. I didn't go through all the typos. I assume somebody's going to go through and do a major typo tidy up in the draft, but some that stuck out, this isn't all typos. Just heads up, the first sentence on page 2-1, the required program components, I don't think it made sense. Page 2-2, the first sentence also needed some work. The fourth bullet on page 2-2 didn't make sense as written. Similarly, on page 2-3, municipal code I think that needed work. Here's a bigger one. On table 2-3, the numbers don't add up. So you might want to look at that and fix that. On program, HO 2.2.1, I was wondering, and in a couple of places, you reference ADUs, but you don't also include junior ADUs, and I wondered why.
So that, through the chair, hit the wrong button on my computer. It's just like scrolling by. That was probably, just wasn't intended to omit them in the sense that they didn't apply. It was probably just need to go back and add them. So, because those state regs basically, they're ADUs, junior accessory dwelling units are different, but there's aspects of it conceptually in terms of better enabling them and removing barriers is pretty consistent for both junior ADUs and ADUs. But I'll go back and we'll take a look at those and bring back some revisions on those.
Okay,
Well,
so
and I don't-
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I
that's
don't have the program pulled up right in front of me right now, but I also think we were using the term ADUs to encompass both ADUs and junior ADUs, so it would include both of them.
Okay, and that's fine, and it wasn't clear, and
Okay.
and if the goal is to let people know that we're trying to encourage these, it made sense to me to refer to both.
Yep.
And so
Great.
that was in HO 2.3.3 also,
Okay.
would be a place to note that. Goal H06 had some wording things to work on. Okay, on page 3-1, and this maybe goes throughout the document, you're referring to new programs, and our current general plan and our old housing, including our old housing element, uses the term implementation measures. And I wondered, to be consistent with our existing general plan, do we want to use that term? Is there a reason you use the term program instead of implementation measure? And what are your thoughts?
We can go either way, just in the most, most of the housing elements that we've been preparing, they are referred to as programs, and that's what HCD calls them, as programs, but I'm okay with changing it, or, we can make it implementation measures or programs.
And I don't feel strongly about that particularly, except that it's the system we've been using and I'm familiar with, and it's how our existing general plan looks. I would want to consider that. I was wondering, on Appendix A, page 5, you talk about our population loss, and that it's partly lack of economic opportunity, and I also wonder if it's also due to lack of housing, because we do have so many empty houses, a lot of empty second homes. And I was wondering where the assumption comes from that it is because of lack of opportunity. And do you have a citation for that? Is this a common assumption? How did you get to that determination, and why not other possibilities?
That's a great question. So, as what we saw in terms of the information available was, there has been some, some industries, or not industries. There's been a decline in the, timber industry. I mean, it's not, that's occurred in the region, here at home, and in Humboldt County as well. And that was one of the primary things.
So is this an assumption, or do you have something that you've cited to back up that assumption?
I'd have to go back and look as to like a source or what have you. So,
and then I also wonder, would you include that there is a lack of housing, and part of the reason we have a lack of housing is houses have been scooped up to become second homes? And I'd also want to know if there's anything we can do about it.
And I might add, a reduction in housing stock in nearby Weed with the fire this last summer.
So I would like to see more of a discussion about that. I mean, I understand we need to have a housing element, and the scope wasn't vast, but I would want more discussion on the underlying reasons for how we got here.
Great. No, we really appreciate that. And, we have done some stakeholder interviews and outreach, and so we are considering what we've heard so far. So this is helpful additional information.
Okay, good. And I'm not done. Okay, on page on page 110, under the definitions, the AMI is $80,300 for Siskiyou County. And on table A13, the median income is $43,135. And I'm wondering what you're measuring that one is half of the other.
So I don't have that chapter in front of me, but I think there's the state income limits, AMI, which does consult the HUD's data and income data, but it's not a perfect match. I'm gonna guess that, but I don't wanna guess, what table A13 is probably the HUD data, which uses a bit different methodology for their estimating, and then, but let me get there first before I.
And Melanie, just, you may have mentioned this, but are they the same units? Are they both median family incomes or individual incomes?
Yeah, for household size, that was going to be my question. What is the household size that they're considering?
Well, right, and it seems like a general term that you use countywide, and then this other term was countywide. You know, if it was within a few $1,000s, I'd say maybe there was something, but when this one is almost half, I would want to know why we're using AMI and where we're using it, and then why in table A13 we're using this other information and AMI didn't really come up again.
So table 13 is income distribution 2010 to 2020. And this is based off of 2010, 2020 US Census data. And also the 2015 data for Mount Shasta is provided, uses American Community Survey data. So this is different than, this is household data. And looking at the ranges here is, I think that's straight from the data source. The rate, the less than 15,000 and whatnot. And then the area median income. That's probably going to be looking at and they're searched in the wrong place.
Yeah, I think one thing to clarify, Michelle, is, and I know you don't have everything in front of you, but one might be median family income and the other is individual. And it might be just, looking at the original data source to see what they're measuring.
Right.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know, so I don't mean to be.
Yeah, the table 13 is households, and the AMI data, so you were mentioning the 82,000?
The 80,300.
For Siskiyou.
Right, and it's a number that I didn't really see used again. It's brought up in the definitions. Right. Why is it relevant? Why are we using different numbers? And do we need AMI in there if we're not even using it, if it's not a helpful number, or is something incorrect because there's such a disparity? So, and you don't have to answer right now necessarily, but I want you to dig and find out. How about that?
Yeah, the AMI, that 82, the value that you're looking at, that is the state income limits. That's data that is generated and calculated annually by Siskiyou County, for Siskiyou County for the entire state, and based on income levels of the ranges of that for different households sizes. And it uses the HUD method, uses some of HUD's data, but is not the same. And the data in table 813 is more of people being asked like what their household income is and reporting that in a survey. And the AMI is more of a metric in terms of if you're extremely low income, your gross household income is less than 30% of the area median income, which for Siskiyou County is 82,000, whereas you get into San Mateo County, the area median income is more like 150,000, so they're adjusted. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but we can maybe provide some more clarification as to.
So perhaps the
difference
AMI isn't relevant because
Well-
it's not a true, snapshot of our community?
Right, and if it's not relevant and if we're not using it, then I would maybe remove it, because at this point, it just seems like we're using wildly different numbers to come up with policies or decisions or thresholds, income level thresholds for subsidies. So I would want to know that.
Yeah, those state AMI, those income limits, that is used in for state housing programs and who is eligible, and to estimate, to determine affordability of units for certain programs, and is what that goes to.
So maybe a little discussion in there to clarify that they're wildly different or something.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. On Appendix A, page 27, Table A21, there's these different categories, and I couldn't understand what the difference would be between a single-family attached dwelling and a multifamily two-unit dwelling.
Okay, so so I think so the detached single-family dwelling would be your
Okay, single-family detached
yeah.
is easy.
Right. Yeah,
What
that's
is single-family attached if it's not a duplex and if that is not also a multifamily two-unit?
Right. I think that would be like a townhouse where people own or like what you see maybe more in San Francisco, units that are the fee title, everything is owned by one party and they share a wall, is I think what they mean. And the 2 to 4 unit, so yeah, I'm not quite sure why they have it that way. It is a little confusing. So, but that's that's data that's from the Department of Finance. That's how they report it. So, but if it's to maybe improve understandability of this, we could maybe provide some clarification in the document about those differences there. So,
Otherwise, I would think they're counting the same thing twice.
yeah, I think that duplex would go in the 2 to 4 units, and the attached would be more like what I think about is the San Francisco row houses. So.
Okay, well, we don't have those here. You should know that on Appendix A, page 39, Table A34, you refer to Rockfellow House. Rockfellow House has been closed for over 5 years, maybe 8 by, I don't know how many now, but we don't have that. It is now an empty second house, actually, second home. Definitely no longer supportive housing.
Okay, thanks.
And that's in at least two locations, I
Yeah.
think, appendix, page A41 too. On Appendix A, page 47, you say there's no agriculture adjacent to Mount Shasta. I don't know, cows in a pasture kind of looks like agriculture to me, so I would maybe tweak that sentence to not say that we have no agriculture, because we actually do have some. And page A64, table A53. Oh, well, this is kind of a bigger question. You could help clarify. I was under the impression that duplexes are now allowed by right in R1. But there's no discussion of that in the housing element. So what happened to that, and why aren't we talking about it?
Well, so the city is, last time I checked, based on the urban census data, the city is subject, or portions of the city are subject to SB9, which is I think the legislation and I know the city actually adopted some regulations about that. So, yeah, I don't know why I didn't cover it, but it is uses a duplex in single-family residential zones would be permitted where it's in those urban clusters, urbanized areas as designated by the census.
So we have places here in Mount Shasta that would allow a duplex by right in an R1 zone.
Right, there should be areas based on the criteria of the state law. I haven't looked at it in a little bit, but the last time I looked, which was probably this winter, there was some SB 9. It appears there's SB 9 areas, and then the city did adopt a local implementing ordinance for it to allow duplexes in R1.
I think we should have some discussion of that in this document, and I didn't see any.
Yeah, we can add that. And SB 9 was, it was adopted by the state, and so the city doesn't have a lot of control over where or how that applies. You have to follow the state criteria and implement the state criteria, but we can add discussion of what that is and what that means for the city.
And probably a program or implementation measure around that, then, it sounds like?
Well, it's already required by the state, so there's no additional program. We could add it in there, but it is already required by the state, and the city doesn't really have a choice.
Okay, well then I think it should be part of our discussion in the document. Let's see. Oh, page 65 of Appendix A on table A53, it reads that the setback is 4 feet, and I was under the impression that it's 5 feet.
So we can double check that. Which, do you recall which, we could double check that.
It's A53 for R1, the setbacks, I think the side setbacks, it reads that it could be 4 feet, cumulative 10, but everything I've ever seen or read says 5 feet. So I don't know where you got that, but I don't think it's accurate. Appendix A, page 97, the first paragraph needs some typo attention. On Appendix B, page 10, table B6. So I wondered, there's a bunch of lists of APNs of lots, and some of these lots, you ended up with more than one dwelling unit per acre. There's not a discussion of the duplex piece in any of those, but there's also a bunch that you suggest there could be more than one dwelling unit per acre. And so I was just wondering how you got to those numbers.
So on page, looks like at the top of page B8, that's right, yeah. So the R1 zone has a maximum number of dwelling units of six units per acre, and discounting that to, realistic, down to 4.5 dwelling units per acre. So that would be,
okay.
maybe subdivision and that sort of thing.
Got it. Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I'm with you. All right, and I don't know if we wanted to talk about, in that also would be a place to talk about duplexes, possibly. And other than, I just wanted clarification on Tucson's comment about the lots on, across from the hospital, Cedar Street, you refer to them as Cedar or on Pine. Are they now precluded from the discussion because they have wetlands on them? Or is it the type of wetland and the expanse of wetland, is that, like, are they, I guess, are they completely excluded, or do you know yet?
Well, for the purposes of being considered a site that can accommodate the city's RENA per HCD standards, there are specific criteria for what that site means. And so I think that criteria is likely going to preclude them from being identified as a site for meeting the RENA, but it doesn't preclude them from development. It's just from being a site identified to meet that need in the housing element.
Got it, okay. That's all for me, thank you.
Thank you.
Did my lengthy list, did this trigger anything else for planning commissioners before I open it up to the public? Okay, so I'm going to open up to the public hearing. There's a good chance we have one person who's come to speak to us. When she's ready. And then if anybody is online that wants to speak to us, we'll have them queued up next.
Okay.
Okay, so my name is Peggy Risch, and I am a resident at Mount Shasta for
And we have 3 minutes, please.
Yes.
Thanks.
a long time, over 2 decades. So first of all, I want to thank you for acknowledging that in the draft housing element, that the site that was earmarked, designated for the regional housing needs allocation will be taken out because of the environmental constraint criteria that eliminates it. So because of that, one of my things I'm wondering about, and with all these questions that you brought up today and some of the things that need revision, whether the planning commissioners can really recommend at this point that it goes to the planning commissioners, to the city council for approval. So you're recommending a draft that already a big chunk, not a big chunk, but the designated regional housing needs assessment sites aren't valid. They're inaccurate. They have to be taken out of the draft and some other sites found. So how can you recommend to the city council that you recommend its approval? And you have all these other questions. So I would actually recommend that, you get some of these revisions and bring it back, and it still has time to go to the city council. You could call a special meeting and get some of the clarification. And just, Alan, to answer your question, they provide the information that in the Golden Eagle Charter School document that the Army Corps of Engineers did a verification of the delineation of those 2 parcels in questions that there were wetlands. So it's not my opinion, it's the Army Corps of Engineers verification. So there is absolutely no doubt those 2 parcels need to be taken off out of the draft, and some other ones need to come in. And that would bring me to the other question, that in the draft is a list of a lot of the APNs, and many of them have whether wetlands or high fire hazard criteria. And since they didn't really use our local data, I'm pretty much concerned that a lot of those APNs have wetlands that are not properly earmarked. And that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Do we have folks that want to speak to us online?
We don't.
We don't. Well, what do you know?
We have Johanna and Vicki Gold. So we'll start with Johanna.
Okay, Johanna, you've got 3 minutes. Let's make sure we can hear you.
Hi there, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was having some technology things, and so my letter is going to come a little bit late, and I'm glad to hear a lot of it was on the wetlands, but I'm going to go ahead and send it anyway so you have the data and the pictures. And I was also concerned about, like, why are we only identifying 2 sites when we have a whole inventory of, we have a lot of locations that we could do, including like the Roseburg and the Landing and all of that. So let's see. So one of my comments was about, it seems like this should be, I agree with everything Peggy said about continuing this and having another meeting. I think that's a really good idea. Because it's too hard the way it is right now. And it was and I'm having, something's going wrong with my microphone too. I'm having a bad technology day. I don't know where to start here, and I'm already losing my time. I'm trying to adjust it for this change. Yeah. Okay, so, I think I'm going to just regroup with I'm going to send the letter that I was going to send today at 5:30, and I think I'm not going to have any comments because it's too hard for me to try to patch this together in the last minute with what happened. So I'm glad to see that the wetlands, the 2 parcels were adjusted. So thank you, and I appreciate all you guys are doing to fix this and asking good questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna.
Okay, we have Vicki Gold.
Okay, Vicki, you've got 3 minutes. Let's make sure we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I agree with everything that Peggy said. I think it's very important for you as a planning commission to have the opportunity to look at the changes that you pointed out. Some of them were very substantive, and I think that if you don't have another chance and another special hearing, it really implies that the Planning Commission is not that important, and I think your job is very important. So that's the first thing. I also think that because of the time being the 4th of May for the end of comments, it would be optimal to have it sometime after that, but I know you're time constrained. My concern is also that nothing was mentioned about Danco providing the 2 units that are necessary. And as I recall, Vaughn asked some very important questions with regard to the assurance that those would remain affordable units. I think they were extremely low and low, if I recall. I may be wrong about that. I looked through it today and I couldn't find it. I didn't have time to listen to the hearing. But my recollection was that they were for 55 years, according to the consultant for Danco, and also that they wouldn't even get the grant for the project unless they did confirm that they would be remaining low and very low income. And I believe those were the 1-bedroom units. I do think that would satisfy all of the need that is required, mandatory by the HCD. I also didn't find anywhere in there, I thought I saw it, but I didn't when I looked again, the nest and the hospital, because those are 2 places that would be absolutely optimal for high density and low income housing. And I just wondered why that wasn't included. And I would ask that you consider doing that because those are very, very prime locations, central, no problems really, except just renovation, and the grants that you listed would provide for that. I feel that you have great potential for attaining grants for that, as well as for, some of the other parcels. But I'm very glad that you're seeing that we have to take out those two parcels where Golden Eagle is located, because two projects can't occupy the same space, even though you've heard through the grapevine that they are building elsewhere. And the wetlands are very significant, and if you don't think so, ask the geese. Even if the Army Corps of Engineers hadn't designated them as significant. I'd really like to know the answer about Danco and why that wasn't included. And thank you to Tucson for pointing out the error about the 12 rather than 25 units on Carmen.
Thanks, Vicki. Is anybody else queued up?
Oh, nope, that's it.
Okay, commissioners, then I'm going to close the public hearing part of, I don't know if we're a public hearing, public information part, and ask commissioners any additional comments, questions. Vaughn, let's start over with you.
None.
Belinda, Tucson.
Just from the public comments that we just heard, can the Nest property or the old hospital property be considered for the NHNA compliant properties? That's something that you could possibly look into.
So there's a couple issues, and it gets a little bit into the minutia. The old hospital is still under the owner's control. I'm hoping that changes on Thursday when I'm in court. The Nest is in receivership, but I think there is some misunderstanding of how receivership works. Once those properties are in receivership, they are not city properties. They are turned over to a receiver, aka a real estate agent, that has the majority of their experience dealing with receiverships. And they work on getting that property in shape to sell it, and and figuring out what the cost of cleaning up that property, and then what its value is. And once the property is cleaned up, what it sells for minus the cleanup cost goes back to the original owners, but it's then sold on the open market. Now, with that said, if with the Nest being in receivership, if it fits HCD's criteria in terms of being close to public transit and the ability to walk to services, which is required for affordable housing, then that could be considered, and the same could be with the old hospital as long as it ends up in receivership on Thursday.
So the derelict property, the derelict buildings wouldn't interfere with that for the purposes of
I don't know, and I don't know enough. Maybe the team does. I know that it's an arcane question of how properties in receivership, whether or not they can be considered.
And for the regional housing needs allocation, they ideally are vacant sites, and there's additional criteria if there are not vacant sites, and they also have to be designated at a high enough density, which for the city is, I believe, 15 or 16 dwelling units per acre, so they have to have that density allowed on them already.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I guess we'd have to take a look at that.
We can evaluate them.
And we'd have to look at location versus the other criteria that HCD needs.
Anything else, Jason?
The other question Vicki had was a good point. Can those two units from Danco that is going through be considered the extremely low and low unit in the 25-unit Danco project?
That is a great question, and we had that same question and wanted to find other sites if they're available for Planning Commission and Council consideration, and then also, we feel like we need to get HCD's opinion on that, and they are the ones who, in the end, will say if those sites that are planned and have been approved can be used to accommodate this cycle's RENA. So we have to look at the timing of the approval and if HCD will allow that.
Okay, thank you. As far as, our, recommendation to move on to the city council, there seems like there's a lot of little corrections and considerations that could come back to us for another pass, another look, especially with these new parcels being looked at again. So I'm in favor of it, just coming back to us one more time.
What timing-wise, maybe the question then to the consultant is, timing-wise, how long is it going to take you to come up with the alternate sites, make some revisions to the doc, and if we were to have a special meeting to fit the timing that we need to hit the May council meeting, is that feasible?
It's like 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think it is feasible, and we will have to, we will address as many of the kind of typo and other comments that we can, but then we also need to recognize that we will be continuing to accept public comments and won't be able to make necessarily, we can make respond to the comments that we have now and that we heard from the commission tonight as best we can, but we can't necessarily incorporate, additional public comments as they're received up to a certain time, just to give us time to prepare a revised draft for planning commission. But
I would think maybe we'd need to decide what was the important pieces what would be important to us to consider that would be changed. So are you good? I'm gonna check with Alan and then we'll revisit that in a sec.
So the hospital parcels, whatever we want to call them, is it, if there's any wetlands on a property, they can't be considered, or they have to be encumbered by more than an acre, or?
I don't know enough about the properties to tell you. It really depends on, if the wetlands are being disturbed, how much of the site it covers. I don't know enough about them.
So as far as the criteria for which parcels can be considered, can they not have any, like wetlands or whatever on the property, or just they have to be partially encumbered or fully encumbered? What's the criteria?
I mean, you may remember when
You're muted.
Okay, there
sorry. And I know Michelle can't answer this best, but it looked like she needed a glass of water. But the city has adopted some standards that if there are wetlands present on the site, that requires then a discretionary review of the housing that's proposed for that site. So for meeting the actual regional housing needs allocation and that criteria, if it requires a discretionary action, then it won't meet the criteria.
I see, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so back to, because I would say, and you all can help me with this, there's substantive change coming up, especially around these parcels, that we would potentially want to look at before deciding to pass it on to council. So we need to decide how much, is there any other discussion that we would want to see? Has it risen to a level that it's important enough that we want to see that before it goes off to council? So commissioners, I need to hear your thoughts on that.
Most of the stuff.
You need to.
I was just talking to you guys. Most of the things that came up are fairly insignificant. They were like clean up the text, whatever. And I would suspect that finding 2 new parcels that fit the criteria might be challenging within the time frame. if it's, if it's, what is it, the 18th today, that's 2 weeks.
And how much noticing do we have to do of a special meeting? How much noticing do we need to do of a special meeting if we were to have one in,
And I won't be here at the beginning of
24
May.
hours?
So,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, then the 22nd, so if we had one, whatever, the Tuesday before the 22nd, say, or whatever day, that's mid-May.
well, that's our planning commission meeting.
Or could we do it at our next regularly
Scheduled. yeah.
planning commission meeting? I don't know the date of it.
I'm sorry, I don't have a calendar in front of me. Is it before the 22nd?
I don't know.
It looks like it's May 16th would be the regular
Yeah.
planning.
Third Tuesday?
Okay.
Does that work for you guys?
So if we had
Planning team?
If
May
we
16,
revisited this, that gives them time to find other parcels and to come up with some responses to our questions. We revisit it at our regular meeting. That gives us time to pass it along to council. Does that work?
Todd, what do you think about that?
If we've got the time to do it, why not?
I think that's a good idea.
What's the May 5th cutoff that I was hearing about?
That's the
That's
public
for
comment.
the 30-day public comment period.
So that will also incorporate into this, be incorporated into our planning commission meeting in May?
That's a question for the team. I would assume so, but this is for the group or the team to answer.
This would be on our May agenda, our regularly.
Our team or that team?
That team.
Oh, their team.
Yeah.
We're in many teams.
I'm not sure if I heard the question.
So with the public comment period closing on the 5th, if we meet on the 16th, will that give you the time to incorporate the public comments we've received by May 5th?
It depends on how significant the comments are, I would say, but I would think it does. And then also, the May 5th is the end of the 30-day required comment period, but
We're going to
the
still
city
take
still
comments.
accepts comments
Yeah.
all the way through the council hearing. So I think that if we say, yes, we'll try to address and consider the comments we received through May 5th, well, depending on when a packet would have to go out and we would want to distribute the draft. But we
Okay.
could do our best to address them.
I mean, that seems fair to me because you're going to still be getting comments even from city council, presumably, that you will incorporate into the draft.
Above and beyond city council, when HCD comes back to us and they ask us for a whole bunch of stuff,
Yep.
and we to figure out whether or not we can accommodate or we need to or we're required to accommodate, that's going to generate additional public comment. So this is an iterative process because it goes to council. It's not done until the HCD slams the gavel.
So I would say then if you can incorporate as many public comments as you can that you'll get up to the 5th and incorporate planning commission comments and have that draft for us for our next regularly scheduled meeting, and then you would have found some additional parcels to fill the gap. I think that sounds like a plan. Commissioners?
It doesn't slow anything down.
And we aren't slowing down the process.
So we make a motion
Let's
to
do a motion.
continue? I move we continue this until our next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting on the 16th of May.
Okay, that's
I will second that.
we have a motion from Alan, we have a second from Belinda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. So that passes. We will revisit our housing element. Thank you to you from Plan West for all your helpful feedback and information and community participation. It's been lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and thorough review and for allowing us to participate virtually as well. We appreciate being here.
We have a great team. I'm so glad the city is supporting this. It's lovely.
Yeah, I appreciate the detailed feedback. Thank you.
Can't help it. an editor or something. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to item number 5, but we don't have an item number 5. So I'm moving on to item number 6, which is commission and staff comments. Commissioners, comments?
General comments?
General comments.
About this project or anything?
No, we're done with the project.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any kind of record of the accidents or number of accidents that happened at the corner of Washington and McLeod?
Contact Ken Kellogg, and he can pull that data for you.
Guessing there needs to be a 4-way stop there instead of just a 2-way.
So that isn't what determines what stop controls are there.
Okay.
It's based on what the state calls warrants, and it's the number of vehicles that are running through that intersection, and what we're allowed to put there and what we're not. But you know, if that's problematic intersection, we're seeing a lot of crashes, then we can look at other, you know, depending on the volume, we can figure out what kind of stop controls we can use, one, and number two, what other kind of interventions can we consider?
Yeah, the reason why I ask is I mean, almost every time I get there, somebody's running right through it.
I know.
And certainly twice in almost one day, I saw it while we had snow on the ground.
Yeah.
And people just blowing right through it. And so it made me, you know, beg the question. Obviously, if there's no wrecks, I guess no big deal, but it seems like somebody's going to get hurt sooner or later there, so better. I mean, 2 signs can't be that expensive.
Oh, I had a car smashed there, if that's any comfort.
Did you now?
I mean, we've got,
What business will those people coming downhill
park.
stop?
well, we've got a lot of locations.
Well, if
I
they
mean,
have a stop sign, they will.
No, they don't.
I mean,
Because they
Lake-
don't stop the other direction.
Lake Street is a common area where we get complaints, and I don't want to call anybody out, but we had an individual complaining about the speeding on there, and a week later, we picked her up doing 81.
Wow, impressive.
Ooh,
People are funny.
That takes talent.
81. That's
That
something.
takes work. It's talent.
You really gotta.
Get after it to get that going like that.
Yeah, so I just wanted to put it on the radar. It's probably not a bad idea. And, you know, I don't know that I've ever seen any kids there, but geez, if there was kids there too, it'd make it that much worse.
Big giant topos.
Oh, yeah. Launch them.
Speed bumps work, I hate
Uh,
to say
they
it,
do.
but they just aren't legal.
Right. Anything else, Vaughn? Vaughn, anything
No.
else? You good? And Belinda?
Nothing.
Tucson?
Thanks for bringing that up, Fawn. I live up that road myself, and I've seen the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Especially in winter. People, you're just trying to stop coming from Washington, coming down and just sliding right through. Every time I drive up McLeod, I'm always like, oh no.
I mean, you really have to look hard because you don't know.
I look both ways, like really quickly,
Yeah.
you know.
Glad it's not just me. Just
Well, so it just jogged my memory. We're already looking at how we can potentially redesign that intersection, and what in part of McLeod Ave. And so we need to we're trying to figure out dimensions and what is out there in terms of the width of the road and what the right-of-way should be. And we're looking at a federal grant to rebuild that area with the help of a traffic engineer to improve the conditions there.
doesn't look like there's a lot of room there for much anything. I wouldn't call it necessarily blind, but
Yeah.
you don't really get to see too far. But you better have your eyes open when you get to that intersection.
I think,
A
so
little
the issue
roundabout,
is,
maybe.
it looks like it's about 30 feet across.
Yeah.
And, but when
not
you
a lot
look at
more.
the city records, it shows when the city was incorporated that that right-of-way width should be 60 feet. And then you look at about 30 years later, and it was listed as 50, but it hasn't been changed since then. So how did the curbs get narrowed? And what is our property and what is not the city property?
Right.
So then we can figure out what we can do in terms of a resolution and then apply for a grant with that. So it's in the works.
I did bring this up a few years ago, and just one suggestion in the interim is to do some, white striping, just so people can see better.
That would be something.
And just alert them, maybe even a groove or two in the road. But,
It has been
there's a lot of
discussed.
potholes there.
So striping doesn't really work very well, especially in a snowy environment. But one of the things that is a potential resolution is what's called a pork chop, where you put out an actual island out there to clarify that intersection.
Yeah.
Even, I was thinking of the cheaper option of just 2 extra stop signs, which would be nominal, I would think.
People aren't
But,
stopping. They aren't stopping at stop signs
It's hard to
anymore.
stop.
It's really gotten bad everywhere.
Well,
Going up,
all it
'cause
takes.
one's going uphill and one's coming down.
But I think, if you were gonna spend a little bit of dollars just to like a flashing yellow light or something, but stop signs for starters would be, but if you're looking for grants, I don't know if that would invalidate any grant you're looking for or not. But-
Oh, no. It's just got to meet warrants.
Well, I'll go down there on Saturday and help you post it, put a couple of post holes and do it.
Yeah.
I used to
It's not
see
that
some-
big of a deal.
We've got to do official traffic counts, and
No,
they've got to be on
it's-
certain days of the week, and there's a whole list of criteria.
I know, I'm being facetious, but I'm just kinda.
I
But-
seem to
thank you.
remember them putting like a stop sign on a post in the middle of an intersection sometimes. I mean, the lanes would go by it, but it could
Well, that one
sit
wouldn't
there.
last long there, I don't think.
Probably not. That's probably true, but
I think that stop sign was probably a volunteer.
yeah.
Oh, I want mine. I want my own stop sign. I want to deploy. I'd volunteer to deploy one. Anything else, Tucson?
That's it.
Alan? I have a question. It's been a while since we've approved any minutes.
Yes, I was thinking that too. as I
We
was
might
trying
want to do a little housekeeping around that.
Yeah. Let me check with Kathy when she's back on Thursday.
Might do a little housekeeping.
What's that?
Housekeeping,
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got a
approving
record
a
of this,
stack
we've got a
of them.
recording of this meeting, so therefore we should have minutes.
You would think,
Yes. So,
and we would need to approve them.
Several,
Many,
yes.
many.
I don't think it'd be going back very far. I'll be useless.
I can't remember the last time that
I forgot we had to approve minutes.
I was in a meeting today and it came up. I'll just do a little deal. So I'm on, thanks to the city, I'm on the, I have a membership to the American Planning Association, and they have all this totally geeky planning theory and latest and greatest, which I like. But the group I'm involved with, I'm on the board of the Sacramento Valley section of the California APA, and we're working on rural outreach and rural planning mentors and trying to help rural cities retain the planners they get and maybe make it so that when a planner's there, they've got some extra resources. So it's a little interesting thing that's going on. Anything for us, Todd?
I don't. I'm so inundated. I can't. I'm getting back from being off for almost 2 weeks, and I'm just trying to get up to the air to breathe. So.
Oh, maybe talk about Kyle.
Oh well.
Henry?
So I got word while I was out that Kyle has found another job, and so TRC is putting a new planner in. I talked to one of their principals over there today, and I told her we've got to get somebody. Whoever you provide has to have more experience than the last planner did. I mean, Kyle did a pretty good job of, he got better on a lot of things, but from the beginning, it just, A, lack of preparation, and B, no experience is just not going to fly. And I'm hoping with some of the new places that we're posting not only, so we're posting 2 positions, looking to fill 1, and that's the planning manager versus a planner where we would consider a new grad and train them up, right?
But Juliana was.
And right, but you know, and she caught on very quickly, probably an anomaly. But I'm hoping that you know, we'll get some responses. I have 1 qualified applicant that submitted a resume. You know, it's a new grad, so limited you know, experience. I called this person this morning to talk to them to gauge their interest and haven't heard back. So. I'll try again tomorrow, but if I was looking for a job coming out of graduate school, I would have been on that phone 5 minutes later.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Todd. All right. Future agenda items, aside from we've already discussed, which will be the housing element. Anything else down the pike?
Not at the moment.
We've
got to get a solid planner on.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, that was item 7. Item 8 is to adjourn our regular Planning Commission meeting from Tuesday, April 18th, 2023.